Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jen Myers. This is my first speech for class CST 100-D02. Before I get started on my speech, I'd like to introduce some of my audience members. This is Ann Tyler, Rebecca Brown, Catherine Wright, David Jenkins, Frida Pagan, Ashley Hewitt, Shelley White, and Precious Johnson. Say hi, everybody.
Hi.
Thank you. Today, my speech is to inform the audience about heart transplant. Have you all ever wondered about organ transplant, or specifically heart transplant? Have you wondered what is a heart transplant? This subject is close to me because I had a heart transplant 15 years ago. And this is the process that I and heart transplant patients have gone through to get a donor heart. The National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute has defined heart transplant as removal of a diseased heart and replaced with a healthy heart from a healthy donor. 90% of transplant patients are at the end stage of heart failure to be considered for a heart transplant. Today, I will tell you about the first heart transplant, the surgery that consists of a heart transplant, how someone is considered eligible for a heart transplant, and what happens after you are chosen as a pre-heart transplant patient. And Centera Norfolk General Hospital, where I had my transplant done, about how they've been doing transplants since 1989. Dr. Christian Bernard performed the first heart transplant surgery on a human being in South Africa in 1967. Good year, that's the year I was born. Unfortunately, the patient only survived 18 days. The heart transplant consists of 3 surgeries. The first operation is harvesting the heart from the donor. The second operation is removing the damaged heart. The third operation, according to medicine.net, this is where all this information is coming from, is the easiest, is the implantation of the donor's heart. Okay, now you know about the first transplant and who has done it. Now let me tell you how someone is being considered to get a heart transplant. There are a series of tests and decision making for someone to be considered eligible for a transplant. The heart transplant specialist at the heart transplant center will determine whether a patient is eligible. The specialists often include a cardiologist, which is a doctor that diagnoses and treats heart problems. A cardiovascular surgeon, a doctor who transplants hearts. A transplant coordinator, which is a person that makes arrangements for surgery, such as transportation for the donor's heart. A social worker, a dietitian, and a psychiatrist. All these are needed for not only your physical state, but your also mental state of mind. Okay, now you know who makes the decision to consider somebody for a heart transplant. These same people put you on a waiting list. This is what to expect before you get the heart transplant. The transplant coordinator or physician places you on a waiting list, which is national. And I can tell you from my own experience, for a heart transplant patient, waiting is the hardest thing. you don't know what to expect. Depending on how sick you are, you wait at home with a pager or inside the hospital. I did both. This next information comes from the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute. It's about waiting time. Approximately 3,000 people in the United States are on the waiting list for a heart transplant any given day. About 2,000 donor hearts are available each year. Waiting time varies from days to several months, and dependent on the recipient, and it depends on the blood type of the recipient. As I mentioned before, I waited both at home and in the hospital. I waited 5.5 months in the hospital and the rest of the time at home prior to waiting in the hospital. A person may be taken off of the list sometimes dependent on a serious event, medical event, such as a stroke, infection, or kidney failure. Thank goodness none of that has happened to me. Also, time waiting is also plays a great factor in this process. For example, a donor heart is available, and there are two recipients of equal need. The one that's been waiting longer most likely will get the heart. Okay. After being considered for a transplant and put on a waiting list, the final day has arrived. As I mentioned before, I was waiting a total of 5.5 months in the hospital. It was in Santerre, Norfolk Hospital. A nurse came into my room and told me a heart was available for me. It was February 18, 1996. It was 5 p.m. It was a time I'll never forget. A wave of emotion came over me then. It's coming over me now as I think back of that time. I have a graph of what a transplanted heart looks like after surgery. Just a drawing. I didn't want to gross anybody out with the real thing. And this is, you can see up here where they severed the arteries and reattached it. So this is what a transplanted heart looks like. Let me tell you a little about Santerre Norfolk General Hospital. The surgeons at Santerre Heart Hospital has transplanted their 300th patient in 2010. The Santerre Heart Transplant Program has celebrated its 20th anniversary in August 2010 and marks its 300th heart transplant since the program inception in 1989. Brooke Briggs was the 300th patient in May 11, 2010. I was the 94th patient in February 18, 1996. In conclusion, I hope you have learned something from my experience and some of the facts I have presented today about heart transplant. Dr. Christian Bernard was the first person to perform heart transplant. There are a series of three surgeries consist of the heart transplant, and there are a group of health professionals that make the decision to consider someone for that surgery. Sorry, cut off the video a little too quick. My audience do have some questions.
Jim, what is the average expectancy of a heart transplant? How long does it last? The average?
But at the time that I've gotten my transplant done, they told me 5 years, but it's been 15 years now for me. As medicine gets better and they continue research, I think it's about 20 years now, but who knows, it might be even longer as time goes by.
Thank you. It's great information.
Thank you for your question.
What was the youngest patient that has had a heart transplant?
I did a little research on that. I'm not too sure of the youngest, but I know they do transplant on babies because while my stay there, I heard of the same doctor that did my surgery, Dr. Symbolic Peteri. He had to do a surgery on a baby, and I believe that baby was just a few months old.
Now, do they test the heart? I know they test it to see if you're a match, but as far as for disease and any other thing that could go wrong?
They do a series of tests before they even transplant that heart out of the deceased person. They check for, that person's also checked, health history is checked out to make sure that they don't have a history of cholesterol problem, heart disease, and things like that. There's also, I mentioned in this speech, your blood type has to match. That person has to be about the same size as you. You know, your heart is about the size of your fist. So I'm so short, I probably got a little kid's heart. Yes, they check for everything possible. I didn't mention this in my speech, but when I had my transplant done, the heart wasn't working in the beginning. It kept stopping, and I had while I was in ICU, I had an external pacemaker because it would stop while I was asleep. And the doctor came to reassure me and tell me it's a good heart. There's no problem with it. We just got to. He didn't want to put an internal pacer on me. He said just give the heart time and not to worry.
Thank you.
After the successful heart transplant, does patients find themselves going back for additional surgeries, or is it just one time?
Yeah, that continues all through life. You have to continue to go for regular checkups. I consider it just like everybody else. Everybody should go get checkups for everything to make sure it's working. They check for rejection, for blockage, any kind of disease. Unfortunately, I have a new start on life, say, but with the medication I'm taking, it creates other problems, and because of that, I do need to see the doctor regular. But like I said, it's all just prevention and make it better for me to be here with my women.